When we were talking about the differences between a drone or the standard education and the way that people actually learn, we saw some pretty distinct differences. The drone education is built on memorization, obedience, passivity, pleasing an authority figure. Those are the priorities. In the way that people actually learn, the priority is being able to solve problems, actual progression, learning that is long-lasting, that you're able to keep the information that you've studied. There's another distinction that we have to make. In standardized, or what we've been calling the drone education, the priority is what is correct, as opposed to what happens when we actually learn, which is what is true. And the distinction between correct and true haunts all of us in our day-to-day life. It's a constant thing. Let me use an example to illustrate it, and then we'll talk about what to do with it. So when I was younger and I was in a classroom and we were learning about continents, at the time we were given a huge map of the world, and then we were given a definition of what a continent is, which is, at that time, the definition was something like a separate, distinct land body. As you are reading that definition, which at the time we were supposed to memorize to get ready for a test, I couldn't help but look at the map of the world and see Europe and Asia with an artificial line of demarcation between them to show that they were distinct continents, but to see that they were actually connected, that they were not separate land bodies. So I mentioned this to a teacher. I want to know what's going on. I feel as a teacher that she should have been grateful to have some kind of interaction, someone interested and wanting to form some kind of connection with the subject. That's not what happened, but it's what should have happened. We could have talked about it. We could have talked about why it's like that. It turns out that the United States and other areas are in the minority of world opinion in talking about continents. We use a strange 7-continent system where most of the world uses a 6-continent system, and they pay attention to the rather common sense and obvious point that Europe and Asia are connected and they're not separate. We could have talked about racism or political divides, or for some reason why that distinction was there. But instead what the teacher said is she closed the book and she pointed at me and said, "What I've given you on that sheet is the right answer." The point was that we were just supposed to memorize that. It was what was correct. It was what was approved. It's been agreed upon, and it's what you're supposed to recite back. In a memorization system, that is what we are taught. Bring in information for a short period of time and then learn when to regurgitate it back in an appropriate manner. And after the test or the class is over, it is forgotten. It doesn't make its way to long-term memory, doesn't inform or help with any of our later kinds of learning. We have distant ideas about things that we might have memorized or might have learned at some point, some vague familiarity, but we don't have the actual knowledge, the accumulative knowledge that we're supposed to have, which is the whole purpose of school in itself. This distinction between true and correct is everywhere. You will see common sense, things by observation. You will see things by lived experience that other people will deny because they are not agreed upon. They are not acceptable. They're not correct. And that distinction, while it's going to haunt us, there are things that we can do about this. First off, we learn the best when it is experience-based, when it is interest-led, when you are interested. So let's take some topic, whatever it is that you're studying now that's difficult for you, that's boring. We need to find some way to get interested in it. We have to find some way to incite your interest and then to start accumulating experience. There's no shortcut for time. The time you put into a subject, the time that you give it mentally is what makes those connections. It's what gives you experiences with it, and it is what will teach us. And that's what helps with our long-term memory. And then what helps us to form our own decisions, our own opinions about it, which is sometimes the best way to learn. Oftentimes, learning can be confrontational. I don't agree with what has happened in the past. I'm not comfortable with what current policy is. That is still interest. And you're telling the truth. Telling the truth is so much easier than memorizing a lie, than memorizing the trajectory of a lie. If I needed to get out of some appointment and I give some lie, some terrible excuse to be able to get out of it, when I run into that person in 2 or 3 weeks, not only do I have to remember the lie that I used, but I have to remember what kind of trajectory it was. Did I say that I was sick? Would I be better now by 2 or 3 weeks? There's so much of our creativity and imagination that has to go into propping up this lie. Telling the truth is so much easier. And it's a better way of learning. Then you don't have to do things that are counterintuitive. Then you don't have to look at maps, which obviously frustrate or disagree with the definitions that were given, but just accept that definition in order to be correct. We need to make neural connections when we learn. It's an entirely different process to approach a subject, imagine what the teacher wants, and then try to figure out strategies to give that to the teacher, as opposed to just approaching the subject and just telling the truth about it. What is it? What's happened with it? How do I feel about it? And then paying attention to how I can communicate my ideas back clearly and directly. It's better, it's easier, and later on in college, in university, in the workplace, in your family life, you can be committed to a much easier kind of existence, which is just to tell the truth about what happens, instead of a long list of memorizations of things that are supposedly correct or agreed upon or won't cause controversy. Maybe people are frustrated with you more often, but you can be trusted. You can be relied upon. The very people who are frustrated with you, at other times, important times, they can trust you because you tell the truth. You don't bother with a memorization of things that are supposedly correct. You're not interested in propaganda. You're just real and honest. It's a better way of learning, and on what I'll argue, even though it goes beyond my stewardship as a teacher, is that it's a better way of existing. It's a better way of being.